Elvis Presley was more than just a musician. He was a phenomenon. Rising from humble beginnings in Tupelo, Mississippi to the pinnacle of fame, he became the undisputed king of rock and roll. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's name alone could fill the largest concert venues across the world. His performances weren't merely concerts. They were spectacles, electric with energy, passion, and an almost hypnotic charisma that left audiences spellbound. Elvis wasn't just performing music, he was crafting moments that people would remember for the rest of their lives. His gyrating hips, his rich baritone voice, his magnetic stage presence, each element of his performance drew fans deeper into his orbit. Crowds screamed, fainted, and clamored for just a touch of his hand or a flash of his iconic grin. Every night on stage, Elvis wasn't just singing, he was pouring his soul into every lyric, every note, every movement. But as with all legends, the weight of Elvis's crown was heavy. The public adored him, but they rarely saw the struggles that simmered beneath the surface. By 1975, the king was not the same man who had risen to fame in the 1950s. The constant touring, grueling schedules, and personal heartbreaks had begun to take their toll. His marriage to Priscilla Presley had ended in a highly publicized divorce just a few years earlier, leaving emotional scars that even the roaring applause of his fans couldn't heal. Behind the scenes, Elvis's health was deteriorating. The demands of fame and his reliance on medication exacerbated his physical and emotional struggles. He often battled exhaustion, throat problems, and an increasing sense of isolation. Yet, despite these challenges, Elvis continued to step on stage night after night, determined to give his fans the unforgettable performances they had come to expect. On stage, he was the king. Off stage, he was a man at war with himself. It was within this tension, the clash between the public icon and the private man, that one of the most shocking incidents of his career would unfold. The stage was set for a moment that would forever alter how his fans and team saw him, revealing a side of Elvis Presley that few could have imagined. Among the many talented musicians and singers who joined Elvis on his journey was Kathy Westmoreland, a gifted backup singer whose powerful voice brought depth and harmony to his performances. Kathy was more than just a voice on stage. She was a critical part of Elvis's ensemble, someone who had earned his trust and shared moments of artistic synergy that left audiences in awe. Kathy's relationship with Elvis was complex, like many of the relationships in his life. On one hand, there was undeniable warmth between them, built over years of performing together. Elvis appreciated Kathy's talent and professionalism, often showcasing her voice during his concerts in a way that elevated her role from just another singer to a featured performer. On the other hand, their relationship was not without its tensions. Elvis was known for his exacting standards and unpredictable behavior, and those closest to him often bore the brunt of his frustrations. By 1975, the cracks in Elvis's personal life were beginning to show in his professional relationships. The pressure of maintaining his legendary status was immense, and his temper could flare unpredictably. Kathy, who had been steadfast in her support of Elvis, found herself increasingly caught in the crossfire. Rumors swirled that Kathy had started a relationship with another band member, and whether out of jealousy, frustration, or simply the strain of the moment, Elvis began directing pointed comments at her during his live performances. These weren't playful remarks, they were cutting and personal, delivered with a sharpness that left Kathy and those who knew her feeling vulnerable. The audience, unaware of the deeper context, often laughed along, mistaking his jabs as part of the show. But for Kathy, the remarks were humiliating. A public airing of private grievances that she hadn't signed up for. The tension between Elvis and Kathy became a palpable undercurrent during their performances. To the fans in the audience, these moments might have seemed like harmless banter, but for the band and crew who worked closely with Elvis, they were a troubling sign of the mounting pressure he was under. Kathy's loyalty to Elvis was undeniable, but even the most devoted team members have their limits, and Kathy was quickly reaching hers. The moment of truth came during a concert that would be remembered not for its music, but for the shocking events that unfolded on stage. The atmosphere was already tense. Elvis, visibly struggling with the weight of his personal and professional pressures, seemed more irritable than usual. As the band played the opening notes of a familiar song, the crowd roared. But backstage, unease rippled through the crew. From the start, it was clear that this performance was different. Elvis's usual charm was overshadowed by a simmering frustration that seemed to spill over into every note, every movement. And then it happened. Mid-performance, Elvis directed another biting remark at Kathy. This time it wasn't veiled or playful, it was raw, pointed, and deeply personal. Kathy, who had endured these comments for weeks, could no longer take it. In a moment that stunned the audience, Kathy walked off stage. She wasn't alone. Other backup singers, sensing the tension, followed her lead. One by one, they abandoned their positions, leaving Elvis standing alone under the spotlight. The audience, initially confused, began to realize that what they were witnessing wasn't part of the act. It was real, raw, and unfiltered. The atmosphere in the venue shifted dramatically. The cheers and applause that had filled the room moments earlier were replaced by murmurs and uneasy silence. Fans who had come to see their idol were now watching a deeply personal conflict unfold in real time. Elvis, for his part, seemed momentarily stunned by the exodus. But then in a display of defiance, he pressed on, continuing the performance as though nothing had happened. Backstage, the fallout was immediate. The walk-off wasn't just a dramatic gesture. It was a statement. Kathy's decision to leave mid-show sent shockwaves through Elvis's team, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next. For a man who was used to controlling every aspect of his performances, this act of defiance was a challenge he hadn't anticipated. As the concert continued without its usual harmony, Elvis's team scrambled to assess the damage. Would Kathy return? Would the backup singers come back? And most importantly, how would Elvis respond to this unprecedented moment of rebellion? The answers would come soon enough, and they would leave everyone involved more shocked than they could have imagined. The fallout from the concert walk-off was immediate and intense. Backstage, emotions ran high. Kathy Westmoreland's decision to leave the stage was not just an act of defiance, it was a clear statement that she had reached her limit. As the audience buzzed with confusion and speculation, Elvis himself was seething. Kathy, meanwhile, retreated to her dressing room, shaken but resolute. She knew her decision to walk off stage had consequences, but she also knew she couldn't continue enduring the public humiliation Elvis had subjected her to. Other members of the band and crew looked on with concern, whispering amongst themselves about what might happen next. It didn't take long for the tension to escalate. Elvis, visibly angered and determined to confront Kathy, sent for her. His temper, fueled by the stress of the moment and perhaps a sense of betrayal, was on full display. The crew, familiar with Elvis's mood swings, watched nervously as Kathy prepared to face him. When Kathy entered his suite, she found Elvis sitting on the bed, a mix of anger and something else, something harder to define, in his expression. He didn't look like the king of rock and roll at that moment. He looked like a man on edge, a man grappling with emotions he couldn't fully control. What happened next would become one of the most unforgettable and surreal moments in Kathy's life. Elvis held two objects in his hands, a gift-wrapped wristwatch and a gun. The juxtaposition was chilling, one a token of appreciation, the other a symbol of power and control. Elvis raised them both and in a quiet but tense voice asked her, "Which do you want, this or this?" The room seemed to freeze. Kathy's mind raced as she tried to process the situation. She knew Elvis's fascination with firearms was well known, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't about the gun, it was about control, about testing her loyalty and her resolve. Forcing a steady smile, Kathy responded with a calmness that belied the fear coursing through her veins. "I'll take the gift, of course," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. She reached for the watch, hoping her choice would diffuse the situation. Elvis handed it to her, his expression unreadable. The moment passed, but its weight lingered. Kathy excused herself from the room as quickly and gracefully as she could, clutching the watch in her hand like a lifeline. Back in the safety of her dressing room, the full impact of what had just happened hit her. She had just come face to face with a side of Elvis Presley that few had ever seen, a side that scared her more than she could admit. The confrontation between Elvis and Kathy reverberated through the entire tour. Word of the incident spread quickly among the crew, adding fuel to the already tense atmosphere. For Kathy, the encounter was a turning point. She had always respected Elvis's talent and shared a deep professional connection with him, but this moment had crossed a line she couldn't ignore. Kathy's decision to leave the tour came shortly after. It wasn't an easy choice. She had dedicated years of her life to supporting Elvis, weathering his unpredictable moods and demanding schedule. But the emotional toll of that night was too great to bear. She needed distance. Not only from Elvis, but from the chaos that surrounded him. Elvis, for his part, was uncharacteristically quiet in the days following the incident. Those close to him noticed a shift in his demeanor, a mix of regret, frustration, and perhaps even sadness. Though he didn't apologize outright, his actions spoke volumes. Elvis began showering his backup singers and crew with extravagant gifts. Diamond rings, expensive watches, and even custom jewelry. These gestures, while appreciated by some, didn't erase the scars left by that night. For Kathy, the gifts felt hollow, a way for Elvis to mend fences without addressing the deeper issues at play. Despite the material offerings, the damage to their professional relationship was done. The incident also underscored a growing concern among Elvis's inner circle, his increasing reliance on firearms as a coping mechanism. Over the years, Elvis's fascination with guns had evolved into something more troubling. He carried them everywhere, often keeping one within arm's reach, even during performances. His obsession seemed tied to a deeper sense of insecurity, a need to exert control in a world that often felt chaotic and overwhelming. For Kathy, the memory of that night remained a haunting reminder of how far Elvis had drifted from the man she had once admired. The image of him sitting there holding both a gift and a gun was one she would never forget. It was a moment that encapsulated the duality of Elvis Presley, a man of immense talent and generosity, but also someone grappling with inner demons that no amount of fame or adoration could silence. As the tour continued without Kathy, the tensions that had simmered beneath the surface began to bubble up in other ways. Elvis's performances became increasingly erratic, marked by flashes of brilliance but also moments of vulnerability that hinted at the struggles he was facing. Fans noticed too. The King's aura, while still powerful, had begun to dim, and the world was starting to see cracks in the facade of the invincible rock and roll icon. For those who had been close to Elvis, the incident with Kathy was a stark reminder of the price of fame, not just for Elvis, but for everyone in his orbit. It was a moment that revealed the complexities of his character, a mix of light and shadow that would define his legacy long after he was gone. The fallout from the incident with Kathy Westmoreland and the larger cracks it exposed in Elvis's life reverberated far beyond the confines of that fateful night. For the King of Rock and Roll, the pressures of fame had always been a double-edged sword. His meteoric rise to stardom brought him adoration and wealth, but also created a gilded cage that slowly tightened its grip. The incident with Kathy was a reflection of this growing tension, a moment that revealed the fragile man behind the untouchable icon. Elvis's inner circle, the so-called Memphis Mafia, worked tirelessly to shield him from the consequences of his action. They dismissed or downplayed incidents like the confrontation with Kathy, convincing themselves and perhaps Elvis that his erratic behavior was just a byproduct of his genius. But for those who were truly paying attention, it was clear that Elvis was fighting battles on multiple fronts: his health, his career, and his own sense of identity. Behind the scenes, Elvis's dependence on prescription medication continued to escalate. The physical toll of constant touring and the emotional weight of living up to his own myth pushed him further down this dangerous path. While his fans still saw glimpses of the vibrant performer they had fallen in love with, those close to him knew that Elvis was slipping away. For Kathy and others who had distanced themselves from the chaos, the decision to step away was bittersweet. They had shared extraordinary moments with Elvis, witnessing firsthand his talent, his generosity, and his ability to connect with people in a way few could. But they also saw the darker side, the strain of being Elvis Presley, a man who could never truly step out of the spotlight. Despite the strain in their relationship, Kathy never spoke ill of Elvis in public. In interviews years later, she reflected on the complexity of their bond, describing him as a man of immense charm and talent, but also someone who carried a heavy burden. He was fighting battles no one else could see, she said, and sometimes that fight spilled over onto the people who cared about him. As Elvis's career entered its final years, the incident with Kathy became a footnote in his larger story, a moment that encapsulated both his brilliance and his vulnerability. For his fans, it was a reminder that even legends are human, capable of greatness but also deeply flawed. The night Elvis shocked his fans with his behavior toward Kathy Westmoreland became one of many stories that contributed to the complex narrative of his life. For those who loved and idolized him, the incident was difficult to reconcile with the image of the charismatic performer who had inspired millions. Yet in many ways, it was a moment that humanized him, revealing a man who struggled with the same insecurities and emotions as anyone else. For Kathy, the events of that night left a permanent mark. While she eventually moved on to other projects and found peace away from the whirlwind of Elvis's world, the memory of their confrontation lingered. In interviews, she often described the experience as both a turning point and a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fame can distort relationships and amplify personal struggles. The incident also became a point of reflection for Elvis's team. Those closest to him began to realize that their efforts to protect him were sometimes doing more harm than good. By enabling his behavior and shielding him from the consequences of his actions, they had unintentionally contributed to his isolation. For some, this realization came too late. Elvis himself seemed to carry the weight of the incident, even if he never addressed it directly. In the months and years that followed, his behavior grew more unpredictable and his reliance on medication deepened. Yet, despite these challenges, Elvis continued to perform, pouring what remained of his energy into his music. It was as if he was trying to hold on to the one thing that still gave him a sense of purpose. The public, meanwhile, remained captivated by the king. Stories of his generosity and larger-than-life persona often overshadowed the more troubling aspects of his life, creating a mythic image that persists to this day. But for those who knew him personally, the incident with Kathy was a stark reminder of the cost of that myth, the toll it took on the man behind the legend. As time passed, the memory of that night became part of the broader tapestry of Elvis's life, a story that reflected both his extraordinary talent and the immense pressures he faced. For fans and historians alike, it served as a poignant example of the complexities of fame and the human struggles that even the brightest stars cannot escape. In the end, Elvis's legacy was not defined by his flaws, but by the music and joy he brought to the world. Yet moments like the confrontation with Kathy Westmoreland remain important pieces of his story, offering a glimpse into the challenges he faced and the humanity that lay beneath his larger-than-life persona. The night Elvis Presley shocked his fans with his actions toward Kathy Westmoreland revealed a side of the king that was as human as it was complex. It's a reminder that even icons face struggles and challenges that shape their legacy. While Elvis remains a larger-than-life figure, stories like this highlight the man behind the music, a legend who was as captivating as he was flawed. If you found this story fascinating and want to uncover more incredible moments from the life of Elvis and other legendary figures, be sure to like this video, share it with fellow fans, and hit that subscribe button. Join us as we continue to explore the captivating tales that shaped music history.